Hey you guys, welcome to my podcast. My name is Kat and I'm a PA and content creator, obsessed with connecting with like-minded people about all things PA, adulting, and everything in between. On this podcast, we'll talk about tools to find success in your career and how to cultivate joy in your everyday. I'm so excited to have you here along for the ride, so let's freaking do this.
What are you waiting on?
Oh wait, they weren't supposed to know you were here yet. Good morning and happy Monday, fam. You may have seen the title of this episode, and I'll just start by answering the question posed. No one is better. We are all integral parts of the healthcare team. I say this jokingly because if you've been following me on Instagram or TikTok, you may have seen some major hate my way from some trolls about PAs needing to essentially stay in their own lane and not be qualified to use a stethoscope. But that's just the short version. Thankfully, I've only experienced this toxicity online and never in practice, and hopefully you've had the same productive and team-based experience in person, and if you don't, that's toxic, get out. But okay, back to this episode, which I'm so excited about because today we actually have a really freaking awesome guest with us to have this conversation about the differences between doctors and physician assistants and like what it takes to get to these careers, the education, the training, and just some interesting conversation at the end about how we personally view each other's roles. So you're in for a good one. So grab a seat, grab a coffee, and let's get to it. Okay, drum roll, please. Sorry, that was so lame. Since our MD guest is with us, our
embarrassing.
Oh my gosh! Don't give your identity away quite yet. Since our MD guest is with us our entire episode today, I'll start with a little introduction. You guys probably have heard of him before if you've been following me, but a little background. He's a second-year orthopedic surgery resident here in Kansas City. He has a drop-dead gorgeous and like hilarious wife. You guys got to meet her. And he is the sugar baby of his relationship. Everyone, drum roll again, please. Meet Christopher Bernard, MD, otherwise known as Nard, otherwise known as my husband. Woo!
Happy to be here. Thank you for having me be on as your first guest of the podcast.
Thank you so much. That really means a lot to me. Okay, Chris, I'm so excited that you're here. I'm really pumped for this conversation because I do most of the talking in our relationship, and I think the people need to hear from you. And we're going to talk about the nitty-gritty about how we got to where we are today. I'm a PA here in MD, and hopefully this will help some people just still deciding which path they want to go on, or if you're already on one of these paths, just kind of understanding our backgrounds and how we got to where we are. And I'm really excited for the personal conversation we're going to have at the end, kind of talking about topics we've never really discussed. So I'm just curious what your opinion is going to be. But let's dive in. Before we dive into this conversation, though, we do want to be transparent that we will be focusing primarily on PAs and MDs today. We so highly value our peers who are nurse practitioners and DOs, but we would be lying, obviously, if we told you we understood the path to their career like we do our own, right? So these careers are just absolutely amazing, and we don't want to make anyone feel left out. So when we discuss these a little bit here, just know we're going based on our own research and peer feedback, but it would be really awesome if we could get some NPs and DOs on here in the future to really break it down for us. Okay, Chris, let's talk about the differences between these two careers. For the record, Chris and I are both very competitive people, so I just want to put this out there that PA, physician assistant, is the number one job right now. If you go according to what, US News, is that what they say? And doctor is number 5, and surgeon is number what, Chris?
I think that's a generic surgeon.
What's the number?
I don't think that's specific.
What's the number?
An orthopedic surgeon. I'd be really curious if they broke this down further.
Sure,
into the different,
but what's the number?
Surgical subspecialties.
It's number 42, but I was going to say that every experience is so individual, right? Like you're talking about how great orthopedics is. You definitely don't believe it's number 42. So these ratings just mean nothing. They mean shit. So don't look too much into this when deciding on your future. Okay, it is very obvious what a doctor does in our society, but for those of you who don't know, a physician assistant is technically a type of mid-level provider, sometimes referred to as an advanced practice provider or clinician, alongside nurse practitioners. They work with their collaborating, supervising physician and diagnose illness, develop and manage treatment plans, and prescribe medication. A PA is not a physician's assistant and is not a medical assistant. It sounds like the name is going to change back to physician associate, which was the original name, but we'll chat about that another time. But I just wanted to give that official definition. Okay, let's dive into the requirements and education of each of these career paths. Again, we are just focusing on MD and PA. So I will go first to talk about PA since I'm the one talking, right, Chris?
Go for it.
Thank you. Well, the courses required to become a PA. So the basic requirements prior to becoming a PA is obtaining a 4-year bachelor's degree. This can be like legit in anything, people. You could do it in Chinese, you could do it in English, you could do it in whatever you want, dance, but you have to complete your main prerequisites, including anatomy and physiology, biology and chemistry, and usually will include some sort of psychology, biochemistry, microbiology, and sometimes genetics. There are like specific school requirements, so I definitely check out each program's requirements early on. There's even some direct entry programs from high school if you know your goal is to become a PA. Like you could get your bachelor's to master's straight out of high school. All right, Chris, tell us a little bit about what is required before going to med school.
So going to medical school is also going to require a 4-year bachelor's degree. And similar to PA school, you can also get this in any degree that you want. But there are several prerequisite courses that are generally required before applying to medical school, including biology, general and organic chemistry, physics, biochemistry, psychology, genetics, and sometimes English. So a lot of the same courses, plus physics compared to PA school, but then typically anatomy and physiology, interestingly, are not generally required for applying to medical school.
That's really interesting, like you said. And I'm just curious, like, what do you think about anatomy and physiology being omitted from the prerequisite list for med school? Like, do you feel like that's important? Do you feel like that's a really awesome thing that pre-PA students have to do? Do you wish pre-med students had to do it? Tell us what you think.
So I guess I can see kind of both sides of it. Anatomy and physiology is kind of the foundation of medicine. And so I see sometimes from a medical school perspective that they kind of want to train you and teach you in their own manner exactly what they want you to know in terms of the anatomy and physiology. However, I do feel like there is likely a significant benefit if you've had some sort of background in these courses prior to attending medical school. Because if without having kind of any knowledge, it really can potentially feel like drinking water out of a fire hydrant.
We hear that often in PA school.
Yeah, which is something that, is certainly said a lot. There's just so much information out there nowadays, and so much knowledge to try to attain that I think without having some sort of background in these courses can make it more challenging throughout medical school. However, I think it's one of those things where they're trying to allow people from all different backgrounds and all different degrees, have an opportunity to apply to medical school. So I think if you try to make there be too many requirements before applying to medical school, then essentially you're just getting kind of your biology and chemistry majors that end up applying into medical school instead of having kind of a more diverse group of students.
Right, because you're already taking all your elective options to fill those if you're not a bio or chemistry or like some sort of major science going into getting your bachelor's degree. So your electives are just like squashed with all these pre-med, requirements. I will say, I think what I found helpful about anatomy and physiology was the terminology. Like it made it so much easier to have to do anatomy and physiology again in PA school, having already seen a lot of the language. So I definitely think medical terminology is something that is important. And for our PA school, we actually had to do that before we even matriculated on our first day. Obviously the school, had us set up with something, but I think medical terminology is super helpful.
For sure. I mean, I think medicine in general is a whole kind of different language relative to kind of what most of us have experienced kind of throughout college and everything. So having any experience you can prior to medical school, I think, or PA school would only be beneficial.
Well, thank you, Chris, for your feedback. Okay, now that we've kind of got the prerequisite courses out of the way, let's kind of talk about what type of other experiences are required for applying to PA school and medical school. So we'll go back to PA right now. Patient care experiences. This is so, so important. And this is the one thing that's so different between the two tracks, right? PA school requires both patient care and healthcare experience. I know you're saying, Kat, these are the same exact things. They are not. To keep it simple, patient care experience is direct hands-on experience, including medical assisting, EMT, nurse assistant, surgical assistant, nurse, ER tech, etc. I personally was a medical assistant, oral surgery, dental assistant, and a nurse assistant. The recommended competitive amount of hours is about 2,000 hours, which if you do the math, it kind of equals out to 1 year full-time. But I had around 1,000 hours at the time of my application. Really not that competitive in terms of quantity, but I think the quality of my positions kind of stood out. I really do think that this bedside experience plays such a huge role when it comes to clinical rotations and being comfortable already having had those interactions with patients. If you want to know about healthcare experience, that's a little different, right? You're not hands-on, so it's scribing, which sometimes can be patient care experience if you kind of describe it as describe it well enough. But more, we're talking about like receptionist, billing, front desk. I guess that's receptionist, but I don't know. What other things are healthcare experience in your opinion, Chris? He's shaking his head.
I think you nailed it.
I think I nailed it with receptionist and billing. There's so many other things and I'm just blanking right now. But you guys, basically it's just anything that's not hands-on.
I'm sure there's probably like lab tech or
yeah.
like that could
Well, no, because like
lab
tech, you can, I guess if you're, phlebotomy, like if you're...
Yeah, but if you're in like the pathology lab or something
sure,
like that,
yeah.
Specimens and things like that, that
Specimens.
could potentially be some sort of healthcare experience. However, you're not directly involved in their care.
Yeah, you're right. That's a really great example.
Sorry, what'd you say?
I said you're right.
Oh!
Okay, well, let's talk about shadowing. Shadowing a PA is required for PA school. Schools want to know you know what the role is and that you would really admire it. I know it's really hard to shadow right now in this Patricia, otherwise known as the panty, aka the pandemic, but it's absolutely necessary to see the scope. And it's also really beneficial if you can like shadow a doctor, a nurse practitioner, a PA, since all those roles are very different. Well, PAs and NPs are a lot alike in the clinical setting, but their education is so different. And so just shadowing any of those roles could be really helpful when you're trying to make your decision. Okay, let's talk about volunteering. I do think this is part of the medical school application, just kind of to include. I know for PA school, I don't necessarily know if it's required or it's school specific, but I will tell you, volunteering always looks good. While any volunteer experience can add to your application, the most impressive ones are going to be consistent commitments, whether or not they're in medicine, or something like a medical mission trip or like the medical Peace Corps. Obviously, those are super impressive. But what I'm saying is if you have someone who's volunteered at a 5K race one time versus an applicant that has consistently volunteered biweekly at the soup kitchen or a baby holding unit for like 2 years, the latter applicant is stronger when it comes to their volunteer experience, which can really help your application look more holistic, especially if you're missing in other areas, right? Quality and quantity matter, but I wouldn't say this category is a make or break by any means. Let's talk about research. This is really, really not that necessary for PA school. Include it if you have it. For you, Chris, like what do you, is that like a big part of the medical school application?
I mean, I think it's another one of those boxes that you can check.
Yeah.
I think, for applying to medical school, it's not necessarily like, a requirement or anything like that. If you have a ton of research in undergrad or you end up being, working in a lab for, a couple of years before applying to medical school, I don't think it's going to hurt your application by any means. But I think it's one of those things where, if you do at least a little bit of it, it's just kind of another box that you check of different things that they're looking from you.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the same thing with PA school. So I also want to talk about military experience. I bring it up because if you don't already know, the PA profession was founded when medics in the Army were coming back from the war in the 1960s, having had all this field training, but no medical education. The PA career blossomed at Duke University by basically filling in that missing education for these awesome vets. Now, you don't always have to be in the military to be a PA, duh, like I'm not in the military, but from my experience with applications, they will usually ask if you have a military experience. And I personally think that there's some preference to the military personnel. Like, don't quote me, but I do think that that's something that they really admire since it is so unique to the PA profession, right? And its origins. There's also ways to practice as a PA and a nurse practitioner in the military. I actually work with one PA and one NP, both in the military right now in Kansas City. So it's pretty cool. Okay, Chris, so I actually have a few questions. And wait, before I get into that, is there anything about the military when you were applying to school? I'm sure there's a box that like, hey, were you a veteran? Were you, right?
I don't, to be honest, I don't remember completely.
You blocked it out.
I think it's one of those things where, serving in the military is certainly a high honor. And I think it's one of those things where, there's a lot of good characteristics that generally individuals have. And like the training that you receive from being in the military, I think, those are generally well perceived attributes and stuff like that. I don't know that there's necessarily like a specific box per se that, you would check or anything like that. But being in the military, I just think, generally individuals that enter into the military are generally held in high regard.
Yes. Also, just want to take a moment since we're talking about the military. Thank you, our troops. Love you guys. But so I actually have a few questions for you, Chris. Like I said, okay, so we kind of covered a lot of things with other prereqs besides, the course completion, right? If you could pick any one of these other things, what would you include in the medical school application? Like, what would you include as another prerequisite for medical school? Because none of these are actually requirements for medical school.
So I guess, in medical school applications, there's no specific, you have to hit an X amount of hours to be able to apply to, medical school or, things like that. I think
like patient care hours.
There's no specific patient care hour requirements or anything like that for medical school applications that at least that I'm aware of. Maybe it's something,
or you didn't do them.
No, maybe it's something new that they have now, but I doubt it. But I think there's a lot of these things are kind of more indirectly assessed or expected rather than kind of cut and dry of giving exact hours, because I think you'd be hard pressed to find somebody that hasn't had at least some sort of experience in the medical field before applying to medical school. Because I think one of the big questions you'll be asked is, without any experience at all, why do you know, or like how do you know that medicine is right for you, and like why do you want to go into medical school and stuff like that if you've never had any exposure to any of that kind of stuff before. So even though there's not like any specific hour requirements or anything like that, I think you would find that the majority of people that are applying into medical school have had some exposure to the medical field, kind of regardless of what those hours were.
Right. It's kind of more rare to find someone who's like, I know I want to go into medicine and I've never been in an interaction with a patient or someone sick or anything like that, right? I remember when I was on rotations, actually specifically my OBGYN rotation, and I was rotating with 2 medical students, and they were so nice and so awesome to work with. But they had said they had wished that this had been something that their medical schools had required before they applied, that they had some sort of patient care experience hours, because they felt like it was kind of a shock becoming clinical students and not ever having a bedside experience. So I thought that was like an interesting take, but you're totally right. Most medical students I know or have known in my past have had some sort of past experience with bedside of some sort, or in a clinic, or
Yeah, I don't know. For me, for medical school, I think, we get so much of that in our training, kind of over the fact that we have 4 years of kind of, med school training. I think I see it from a PA perspective, and the fact that you guys generally do, 2 years of training. So everything's kind of condensed down. So I think having, a prerequisite requirement of needing those hours to kind of set you guys a little bit further ahead maybe at the beginning of your training is likely necessary, versus med school. They're gonna kind of teach you from ground one how exactly they want you to approach seeing patients, how exactly they want you to interact with patients and stuff like that. So at least for me personally, I don't don't know that it's necessarily important to make it a requirement. I think if some people want more experience and they find it helpful, then I think that's great. But I think trying to make it kind of a blanket requirement for everybody to get hours ahead of time, I don't know if I agree with something like that.
Yeah, I think we can both agree, though, that it can only help you, right? Having more patient experience can only help you, not even just in terms of the application, but just when you come out clinically, when you come out practicing, the more experience you have with different diverse sets of patients, the better clinician you're going to be. And I think that's just the truth. All right. I love it. I'm giving you like an air high five right now because I like that conversation. That was good. Okay, so let's talk about the specialized exams. For PAs, this is the GRE, or now the PA-CAT, which I never took. The GRE was the OG standardized exam, and I took it, and so did, well, I would say most of my peers, but I actually can't say that for sure because the school I went to actually did not require the GRE, which was amazing. I think there were like 8 schools in the country at the time that like did not require the GRE. And I was so grateful because I'm a horrible standardized test taker. However, I did absolutely fine in the GRE and definitely would have been totally fine applying to schools that accepted the GRE. But there's likely going to be a push to kind of move this GRE prerequisite or this GRE requirement into the PA-CAT over the years. Now, the PA-CAT is basically the MCAT for PA school, right? It's very different, but in the simplest terms, it is the specific exam only for PA school entrance, while the GRE is a generalized exam for all graduate programs across the board, speech language pathology, any sort of graduate school, right? English and chemistry and then PA school. So you can you can be a professor, you can take care of patients, you can work on Chinese. I don't know. You could do so much with a GRE in graduate school, but I think it's really helpful if you have something more specific to PA because it is, you're dealing with patients at the end of it. So, it's still in its trial phase. So I think most programs are accepting either, and I'm sure if not all programs right now, I'm sure all programs are going to end up requiring one of the two. And both of these exams are around 4 to 5 hours. So that's kind of our PA school standardized exams. Tell us, Chris, about the MCAT, which I kind of alluded to.
So the MCAT is the kind of the medical school version of, their kind of specific entrance exam. Several years ago, they had a revamp of the MCAT where they added a new section and made kind of some of the sections a little bit longer. Luckily, I was able to take kind of the shortened version.
You got so lucky.
Of the MCAT. Mine was only, I think, like 4.5 hours long or so. Now it's around 7 hours long. It has multiple sections composed of biological and biochemical foundations and living systems.
I'm sorry.
You wrote symptoms in there.
I wrote these down for Chris because he hasn't touched the MCAT in like
forever.
So many years. I'm like, I'm going to write them down for you so you can read them off. And I wrote symptoms.
Sabotage.
Sorry.
Sabotage.
Systems. And then the
chemical and physical foundations of biological systems.
You wrote that one right.
Psychological, social, and biological foundations and of behavior. Critical analysis and reasoning skills. The psychological one and kind of like the foundations of behavior was like the new section that they added on to the MCAT from before. So to be honest, I don't know a whole lot about that. I think it's kind of mainly focused on psychology and I guess kind of how people think.
Sounds like psychology to me.
Right.
And then the score, ranges now. It's a different scoring system.
It's a weird scoring system. So the score ranges, I guess, from 478 to 528. Back when I took it, it was just a kind of straight up score. Each of the sections, there was 3 different sections, from 1 to 15 for each section. So for a total score of 3 to 45, with verbal reasoning, biological sciences, and physical sciences. But I think overall, now that the test is 7 hours, sure, it's a long test, but, once you realize kind of, if you get into medical school, you're going to be taking an extremely long test for step 1, 2, and 3. It seems like a long test and it can be grueling, but at the same time, as you get further and further on in your training, you're just going to have to get used to kind of testing to that length.
Yeah. Would you rather go through the MCAT again or through med school again? I guess the MCAT is much shorter than med school, but
I'm gonna go probably the.
Okay, looking back, would you have rather taken the MCAT that's 7 hours with 4 sections, including the brain stuff and how the brain works, psychology, or the MCAT that you had taken?
Oh, definitely the MCAT I took.
Yeah. And what would you tell students who are afraid of failing the MCAT or not doing well in a certain section or just like feeling really discouraged by their score? Because I know you do so many practice exams that we all do, right, when we're studying for these standardized exams. And sometimes the final product is like way lower than your practice exams. So like, what would you tell students?
I think the biggest thing is you need to focus on your weaknesses when studying for the test, and really practice those sections that you struggle more with, instead of continuing. It's easy to study your strengths. For me, and I kind of fell into this some too when I was prepping for the MCAT. I was extremely strong in both biological and physical sciences, but I struggled hardcore with a verbal reasoning section. And for me, it was so much easier for me to just continue crushing it on the biological and physical sciences. So that's kind of my first round through. That's kind of mainly what I focused on, was doing well in the physical and biological sciences. And I struggled with the verbal reasoning, so I was like, well, I'm just going to kind of put this off, and I'll take my lickings when it comes to the test. Unfortunately, after the first test, the verbal reasoning was a little low for where I needed to be. But then I realized, that's my weakness. That's what I need to focus on. I'm already strong in the other areas. Stop worrying about studying for biological and physical sciences. Do some work in that area, but my main focus needs to be focusing on really trying to improve my verbal reasoning score. And ultimately, that's what I ended up doing in order to kind of get the score to where I needed it to be.
Yeah, Chris has some endurance. I don't know if I could do that exam multiple times, or even once probably, but kudos to you, babe. Kudos to you. Good job. I'm glad it got you to where you are today, right? I will say this is so interesting that you say, yes, you need to focus on your weaknesses, because I think that this is going to be a common theme every time we talk about exams, every time we talk about standardized exams, the PANCE, right? Any sort of step exam, when you're studying, you got to focus on those weaknesses, because it's a really comfortable area to stay in the place that you're good at, right? And that's kind of just a kind of concept about life. But what I also will say is when I went to tour Pepperdine, if anyone knows Pepperdine, it's like a college in Malibu. I really wanted to go there so bad, but there was someone there, some guy kind of talking to us students who were interested in the university. He was saying, I would take the SAT 3 times if I could. And each time I would focus on a different section, and because it was a combined score at that time. I know I don't think the MCAT is like that, but just a little.
I would not take that approach.
Saying.
I would not take that approach for the MCAT.
I am just saying that is one way to do it, but you cannot actually combine your score with the MCAT, right? Because the SAT, you could take your best score from each section, and that was then. This was like 10 years ago, so I actually can't. Say anything about it now.
I'm pretty sure they'll look at kind of
the
score from each test that you take. Mm-hmm. So I would not go with that advice and try to do well in one section and bomb the other ones.
Not advised.
Not a good idea.
All right, moving on. Please, don't take that approach. I just want to let you know that made me think of that experience, and that I really am still so sad that I never went to Pepperdine, but I never would have met Chris. So there's that. We're going to move on to the next section, though. Speaking of prerequisites for PA school, I wanted to fill you guys in on a resource I wish I had before applying to PA school, which is MyPABox. You guys have probably heard me talk about this resource on Instagram, and I cannot say enough good things about them. I thought this would be the perfect opportunity to bring them up since we're talking about prereqs. MyPABox was created by 2 PAs for thousands of PAs to be. It's a comprehensive PA program requirement tracking and organization tool. Basically a platform where you can enter in all your information, like your grades, prereqs, standardized testing scores, patient care hours, etc. Kind of like the CASPA, but before you even get to the CASPA, which is like a whole nother monster in itself, this tool is so great for students months to a couple years out before applying to figure out which programs fit your stats, work with your financial budget, and so on. And by using this before CASPA opening day, you're so ahead of the game when it comes to tracking your information and being ready to apply with confidence as soon as that day comes, which is like so dang exciting. Anyways, guys, you know I love this resource. They've literally compiled all the endless research we've all done when we applied to PA school all in one place at a really affordable price. If you guys want to check them out, you can find them at MyPABox.com, MyPABox on Instagram, and you can always save money with my code CAT15. You can always message me or them with any questions. They're super responsive. Definitely check them out if you're still figuring out where to apply. Okay, guys, let's move on to the education component of PAs and MDs. So you've gotten into PA school, you've gotten into med school, and we're going to tell you a little bit how that looks. For PAs, you're looking at about 2 to 3 years of graduate school in which you obtain a master's degree in physician assistant studies, or kind of whatever else your program wants to call it. There are some doctorate degrees, but honestly, this is the prime difference between PAs and MDs. It's a master's almost always. And if you're getting a doctorate, you're not getting a doctorate in medicine, right? That's a medical doctor. That's what Chris is going to talk about. That's what he is. You're kind of getting a doctorate in what, like PA studies. And to be honest, I need to look more into this, but I know you can get like a doctorate in education, like anyone can, right? So really the main thing is you're getting a master's. Now there are some bachelor programs, and I think they're kind of being phased out, or they're being grandfathered in, but going forward, you're always going to require a master's degree to become a PA. And PA school is comprised of a lot of the same courses that don't go into like as much depth as medical school. And like we usually don't study embryology or histology, which is part of the medical school curriculum. But to break it down simply, most PA programs have 1 year of didactic, which is classroom education, while medical schools have how many, Chris?
2 years.
Yeah. And PA...
Or...
What?
So our school, we kind of condensed the first 2 years into a year and a half.
Oh,
and
that's
actually,
right. Yeah.
Duke actually combines the first 2 years of kind of like classwork stuff into the first year. And then you do a research year your third year.
Yes, you do a research year. My old roommate in New York City, her brother went to Duke for med school, and they had like 5 years or something like that.
No, they have 4 years.
4 years, but 1 year is of research.
Yes.
Okay, and your school was like a year and a half of didactic, essentially.
Yes.
With some research.
Most places you'll find have 2 years of didactics.
Okay. Yes. Most places, right? Same with PA school. A lot of times you can do like the 1 to 2 years of didactic and the last year being clinical, or some sort of thing like that if your program's 3 years long. But most of the time you're looking at a 1 year of didactic for PA school, 2 years of didactic for med school. And then you have your clinical rotations, which is the other half of your education, right? Where you kind of apply all the knowledge you just learned. For PA school, it's about a year. Again, that's going to vary depending which program you're in. In medical school, you have how many years?
So medical school, you do 2 years of clinical rotations. Your third year is usually your standard clerkships, which are kind of your main different specialties within medicine. And then your fourth year, you'll have some kind of base requirements depending on the school, and then that's kind of your time to do some more elective rotations and kind of try to further subspecialize into the specific specialty that you might want to be apply into for residency.
Right, and that's the time you also apply to residency. So you're going on interviews, and some people do like away rotations, like you said, or auditions. They're called so many different things, right? Acting internships. I don't even know what they're called, but
AI, sub-Is,
all the things. Lots of money spent that year, right? But yeah, Chris you did like 5 orthopedic surgery rotations, I think, right?
Yeah, so I did 1 in my home program and then 4 away rotations, because our school finishes our third year in March, compared to most schools finish third year in probably May to June. So I had a few more months of opportunities to do away rotations.
Right. And I think in both programs, I mean, I think I know this, in both programs, both kind of education, whatever.
That was my foot.
That was Chris's foot. But in both...
Katrina!
Stop! That was your foot. Don't tell the listeners that. In both fields of study, when you're in school, you are going to get the chance to do elective rotation. So Chris is saying that most of his were in his last year, probably did some sub-1s in his third year. For PA school, you're usually going to get like 1 or 2 electives. Or you don't get any in your third year?
No electives third year.
No electives third year, people.
Third year is all straight up clerkship.
Straight up clerkships.
Maybe there's some programs, but pretty much third year is you do the rotations that are assigned to you by the school, and everybody does the same rotations.
Absolutely. And you have end of rotation exams, right? Correct. So we also did as well. So in PA school, you're going to get 1 or 2 electives, most likely, depending on your program. But something I really admire about both PA and medical school, the curriculum, is that it's very standardized, right? A lot of times our clinical sites are set up for us, and all programs usually require the same competencies and course completions upon graduation, including like certain skills. Like, I don't know for you, Chris, if you had to complete like certain number of blood draws or injections or anything like that. And I know for my PA school, we had to. Chris is like, I don't know if I've ever done a blood draw before.
I think we do. We definitely have kind of like core competencies.
Yeah.
I think those are typically maybe school dependent versus there are certain ones that are kind of like, I don't know, ACGME. Is that kind of the government body for medical school?
I think it is, yeah. But you're right. Like most of them are going to be school specific, but there are some sort of core competencies that you need in order to graduate from these graduate programs. So school specific, they'll go over that in the handbook, but just some insight. So yeah. And I will say a lot of our rotations are very similar in that main clinical year. So again, like I had mentioned before, I had rotated with medical students. So it was really great to work with them and kind of hear about their experience. Okay, something a little bit different about PAs and doctors is that PAs are ready to practice once they graduate PA school, while graduating doctors will enter residency and continue learning and training in their specific field of study. For example, Chris right now is in his 2nd year of residency, and he is doing orthopedic surgery. So he has 5 years total of his residency alone, and then likely will choose to do a fellowship for a year. Are they ever 2 years? There's one program that's 2 years, right? Or multiple?
There's very few potential fellowships out there where you can do a 1 year of research as part of the fellowship with kind of one clinical year. So no, like HSS for sports has at least one of those options, but it's pretty standard for a fellowship just to be a single year, and then typically people do just one fellowship.
Right. And like nurse practitioners and medical doctors and osteopathic doctors, they all need to specialize in one area of medicine. And for nurse practitioners, there's a little bit more leeway with that. But for like doctors, they have to decide, right? That's the whole reason to applying to residency is what field of study, what field of medicine do they want to practice in? For PAs, it's a little different, right? We can do residencies, we can do fellowships. They usually only last about a year or two if you're going to do them. And they're usually lower paying. But we can practice in any field that we want to. So I can literally do my urgent care role that I'm doing and then practice in orthopedic surgery if I wanted, OBGYN, urology, like literally could do anything, which I really just admire that lateral mobility about the career, which just makes it so different from all the other careers. And I am a super indecisive person, as Chris would probably agree to. He's laughing over here. And so he probably thinks it's a good idea that I went into PA school so I can always switch it up with my career. Do you concur?
I agree. It's rare, but it's not unheard of for somebody in medicine to start a career in one specialty and then essentially they return to residency for a different specialty. Mm-hmm. So anesthesiology is actually a pretty common, like if someone was to do a second kind of career specialty in medicine as a doctor, the only downside is that you have to repeat residency or like do a completely new residency, which is an additional 3, 4, 5 years of training after already doing all of the training that you've done.
Right. I know there are some people I follow on social media who had like switched. Natalie Crawford, MD, she's a fertility doc. She had started a residency in emergency medicine and decided she wanted to switch to OBGYN, and she did that after a year. So I couldn't imagine going through all of residency, some sort of practice, and then changing it up, but people do it, right? I totally had forgotten to say this, and this is a huge part of PAs practicing when they're done graduate school. It's the fact that they have a collaborating relationship with a supervising physician. PAs are not practicing independently. Unlike nurse practitioners, doctors, right, they can all practice independently, especially like for nurse practitioners, it's state specific, but PAs, we do not practice independently. We collaborate with our supervisings, which is something I admire about that career. Like I I will say I have a lot of autonomy in my role, but I definitely value that relationship I have when I need support, and just feeling like a little bit more part of a team from where I'm standing in my career at this time. Okay, we went through so much detail here, so let's talk about some final thoughts. Okay, Chris, if you could do it again, would you still go to medical school, and would you still be an orthopedist?
I think the orthopedics part, I think, is pretty easy for me to answer. I think I would definitely...
You're like, how can I be an orthopedist without having ever gone to medical school?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where it's like, for orthopedics, the amount of experience and exposure we get for orthopedics is so minimal in medical school. It's like, I did all this training, essentially to never, for the most part, utilize this information again. Which is, it's part of the process, and I get that, and, I did what I had to do in order to get to kind of the position I'm in now. So I think becoming an orthopedic surgeon, I would certainly do that all over again. Medical school, I'd say I probably would. It's definitely a lot of dedication, a lot of, hard-working years. But I think in the end, it's all going to be worth it.
Do you feel like it flew by? Because I feel like everyone in PA school is always like, this is going to fly by. The days are long, the weeks are long, but the months fly by and the years fly by.
The days are long, the years are short.
That is
essentially,
correct.
it seems like, every single day, get home and, it may or may not be dinner and bedtime. But overall, I mean, it all goes by really quickly, and, people get through it. And, at the end of the day, when you're practicing, if you're doing what you enjoy, then, it makes it all worth it. And kind of seeing the reactions of patients' faces when you're able to provide them with a specific treatment and, improve their quality of life or improve, the situation that they're in, makes it all worth it.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like when it finally clicks that you're like, oh my God, I know what the hell I'm doing. And you kind of, in my experience, I feel like I've played an integral role in like saving someone's life or catching something really super dangerous. And it has made me feel so grateful for all the work I had put in during PA school, during my orientation process, during my clinical training, and kind of right when I came out of school. So yeah, really cool part of the job that doesn't happen every single day, but certainly puts everything into perspective when those moments do happen. Okay, Chris, I have another question for you. I can't remember what it is, so let me think about it. I have to look at my question.
You can read the sheet. I can read it for you if you want.
Well, I'm going to ask myself the question, would I go to PA school again if I could? Yeah, and I might get some hate for this, but I actually did not think PA school was that bad. It is, you had mentioned before, it is like drinking water from a fire hydrant. That's kind of what they call it. And it feels like that, but that's like what I live for. I'm like, I thrive on busy. Chris is like, I don't know why you started a podcast, because you already do so much. And I'm like, because I thrive on just like running from one thing to the next. And that's how I felt with PA school. So I freaking loved it. Looking back, New York City was pretty cool, even though I didn't get a chance to like really explore that much. But yeah, everyone was awesome. So it was a good experience. Okay, Chris, here is my question. And we are going to talk about this on another day, but I've never asked you this. What are your thoughts about the potential name change from physician assistant to physician associate?
To be honest, I don't have much thoughts. I whatever kind of makes them happy at the end of the day. If there's confusion with the name physician assistant, I'm happy for them.
You're happy if there's confusion?
No, not happy about the confusion, but happy about, if to change it to maybe potentially, alleviate any sort of confusion about like physician assistant, kind of verbiage and all that kind of stuff. I don't care. Kind of quite frankly, the name itself doesn't really have kind of much bearing on, my kind of relationship and all that kind of stuff with PAs.
Well, you heard it straight from Chris, straight from the Nard, man, huh? And honestly, like, I I'm just going to call myself a PA regardless, really.
Exactly.
So
I refer to it as a PA, whatever you want to consider.
Just remember, he refers to it as a PA. Chris is great on the words. You can really tell.
Whatever you want to determine the acronym behind it to be, whatever. But
yeah,
I'm not gonna get all up in arms about the name change from assistant to associate, like whatever.
Whatever. It's gonna be great no matter what. And our whole goal, no matter what role we play, just needs to be continuously providing the best patient care, right? So, and I will say one more thing. I wish there was a little bit more attention going into like the licensing process and making that a little bit easier for students and people moving states and things like that, and just having that be a little bit more standardized. But that's a conversation, like I said, for another day. Okay, Chris. So you work in a surgical setting. I work in an outpatient setting. I work in urgent care where I have a lot of autonomy as a PA. I sometimes work with a physician. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes I got to call them. Sometimes I got to go across to the primary care side, whatever it is, right? Tell me in your words, and obviously your perspective, and we're not speaking specifically to a PA on your floor right now, but tell me what the PAs or nurse practitioners, I'm assuming they probably do the same thing in your unit, what type of role do they have in orthopedics? Do they do surgeries where you're at? Do they do a lot of the floor work? Do you work with them often? Do you like never see them? Are there even any PAs?
So I think some of it kind of varies slightly on whether it's, kind of a specific PA that works with one surgeon versus working with kind of for the service itself. I think they serve kind of both roles. They certainly play a major part in helping out with taking care of some of the floor work and kind of through the day-to-day aspect of things when, patients have questions about things, or if other service has questions about specific patients on the floor. They're a huge help and a huge asset for kind of helping out with those things while we're training in the OR and stuff like that. But at the same time, the PAs and NPs that we work with also have at least one day where they're also helping out in the OR, so they're not kind of exclusively doing floor stuff.
That's good. That's like a good balance.
Good balance of,
Right.
And I think one of the things that's most helpful from our standpoint, we're kind of rotating through different surgeons, constantly. Our rotations are 3 months long at the most at one time. And, oftentimes we're working with multiple different surgeons, even, within those 3 months. And I think having kind of a specific PA or NP that knows the attendings and kind of their preferences and all that kind of stuff really well, that they've worked with them for the last 4 or 5 years, they're a huge resource in terms of kind of knowing what our attendings would want for certain situations. And we certainly rely on them quite a bit for those types of things.
So you'd probably say you have a good working relationship with PAs at home and PAs, well, I shouldn't say PAs at home, with the PAs and your career and a PA at home, huh?
I would like to think so.
I would like to think so too.
I feel like it helps me, I think, a little bit, at work, to drop, hey, my wife's a PA, and I think it gives me a little bit of street cred with them.
Street cred? I love you just said that.
Of like, I respect your role, I appreciate your role and stuff like that. Because I think, occasionally there's times, I don't think that necessarily specifically where we work, but, I think there can definitely be, situations where, a PA, either feels undervalued or, maybe doesn't feel as respected, and, kind of potentially vice versa. But, I think being able to kind of, see what you do and, talk to you about what you do kind of on a regular basis, gives me kind of a good perspective that I'm able to translate kind of for my own work life.
Yeah, just surrounded by PAs. I love it. One thing I was going to ask you too, more personal, what do you think about all these messages I've been getting about how I'm making fun of orthopedists for not using stethoscopes regularly, or how I'm out of my lane for using a stethoscope? What are your thoughts?
Oh my. Well, What a bunch of crap. I don't know. I don't.
Where is your stethoscope? Actually, that should be a more legit question.
I think I actually saw it downstairs in the
storage,
the junk room.
The junk room. So you do not take it to work. When is the last time you've used a stethoscope? Or am I going to get you in trouble by asking this question?
Oh, no, we don't carry stuff. That's a well-known thing that we don't touch a stethoscope. Last time I had one was probably having to take a call for general surgery on my gen surgery.
A year ago.
A while ago, probably like 6 months ago or so.
Yeah.
I don't know if I used it, but carried it around for me at least that day.
Yeah. Well, that settles that, I think, folks. So anyone who wants to say that orthopedist knows how to use a stethoscope, I'm sure he does.
Well, I feel like I definitely know how to use a stethoscope, and I would, be able to utilize one. However, luckily my position allows me to not have to carry a stethoscope, and
Can you tell the people what your OR joke is about orthopods and EKGs?
What's the definition of a double-blinded study?
Oh, I already answered it. 2 orthopods looking at an EKG.
2 orthopods looking at an EKG.
That's so good.
I think that was actually told me by one of my attendings in med school. That is an orthopod. He's the one that initially told me that joke, and I thought it was pretty hilarious. Because I think in general, like, orthopedic surgeons recognize their strengths and weaknesses, and although maybe we were strong in medical school, when you don't utilize a lot of those skills over and over again, they kind of start to fall to the wayside.
Yeah. Okay, guys, that wraps up our episode today. We definitely geared this more towards the pre-medical and pre-PA track. So I hope that this was helpful for our friends still navigating the next steps in their medical dreams, right? We weren't able to dive too far into NPs and DOs, but I would love to have the opportunity to speak with you guys in the future about their education and kind of like how they got to their role today. Thank you so much for allowing Chris to scrub out and join our conversation today. I love that. Kind of like went with our theme, scrubbed out, right? Our title, Chris scrubbed out, woo-woo. All right, I'm getting to loopy weird cat here. We hope you learned something here, and if you have any feedback, send it our way. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review if you want to hear more about these subjects, or if you just want to hear more from Chris, because I know I do. He's a funny guy, guys, from the other side of the podcast.
One and done.
Let us know in a review. We would appreciate it so dang much. Until next time, you guys, have a great, safe day.